we've taken you inside the Old Testament period in Israel. We've taken you inside the New Testament period. But what about medieval times in the Holy Land? Those were the days when European Crusader knights controlled the land. Their castles can still be seen throughout Israel, and tonight we're getting an up-close look with our good friends Elliot Chodoff and Danny the Digger Herman. They'll break down the massive and pivotal battles that took place in what is now modern-day Israel between Crusader knights and Muslim armies. Battles that changed the face of the Middle East forever. Elliot, it is great to have you back with us in a very significant place historically for the region, for Europe, and for the world, really. The Crusader period here in the land of Israel. Let's back it up to the beginning of the Crusades and how we got here.
Well, to understand the Crusades, we have to go back to the millennium. The year 1000, obviously the anticipation of the second coming that doesn't happen. A great deal of interest, a great deal of sort of build-up, and with it an interest in the Holy Land. And here I think it's important for us to say it wasn't called Palestine in those days, it was called the Holy Land.
That's right.
And with it, an increase in pilgrimage through that century, in other words, from the year 1000, even a little before that, but from the year 1000 on, a large number of Christians coming to visit, particularly to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but not only, also to this area where overlooking the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias. Increased friction directly between Muslims and Christians, not just on the state level, but now also on the personal level. And with that, organizations like the Knights of St. John, the Hospitallers, set up actually hostels initially to help pilgrims, to protect them, but not only to defend, to take care of them, ultimately also to take care of them medically. It's a whole story in and of itself. So in the fall of 1095, the Pope Urban, calls for a crusade, which gets organized over the course of the winter and sets out at Easter 1096.
Now, when he calls a crusade, it was in France?
Yes.
And it
Council
was
of Clermont.
Yes, the Council of Clermont, and it was a time of great fervor. People really heeded the call.
Yes.
And another part of the backdrop, which you're laying out beautifully here, Elliot, would be kind of centuries of acrimony between the Christian world and the Muslim world.
Absolutely. So they set out shortly after Easter in 1096. The first thing they do is wipe out Jewish communities in Central and Southeastern Europe. Massacres of enormous proportions.
And these were people supposedly fighting in the name of Christ.
Yes.
A Jew, by the way.
They take Jerusalem in June 1099, battle there, and then expanding. They push out essentially to this line, a little to our east, build fortresses along here. Beyond there, and we can see in the distance, is the Golan.
So they built a Catholic kingdom. I think that's a crucial distinction. This is pre-Reformation.
Yes.
A Catholic kingdom in the Holy Land.
Called the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
There are battles, and to go through that, the rest of that century, in other words, from 1099, would be a whole course in and of itself. They take the Galilee in the early 1100s.
So they had success. The first crusade, they had great success, it sounds like.
And then they go into sort of a decline, not in terms of losing, but in terms of quality. Now here we have to understand something. The leaders of the First Crusade, in many cases, are first-rate, and it's not politically correct to talk about better and worse, but I'm not politically correct. What can you do?
That's why we love you.
But then either they die off, or they go back to Europe.
Yeah.
And the people who came here, in other words, the masses, are not the, shall we say, the creme de la creme. They're the second and third stringers, and they're the ones who establish themselves here. And what happens over the course of the next, say, 7 decades or so, is a decline in the quality of administration, a fragmentation as essentially third-rate aristocrats are battling over less and less. Overall, the Crusaders hold their own.
They essentially brought European feudalism here to the Holy Land, and also built castles, another European feature, throughout this land, which are still here today. The remains of some pretty impressive Crusader castles.
Some of the most impressive archaeological stuff out here.
Saladin. Why was he so important? Who was he?
Okay. What he does in the 1100s is what armored warfare does in World War II. Probe the weak points, attack where you can be victorious, withdraw where you can't, and as we'll see in the battle here, use everything to your advantage, draw your enemy into as many traps as possible, and if your enemy is as incompetent as the Crusaders were here, they're going to fall into every single one of them.
Yeah. And he was the most powerful Muslim leader in the region at that time, ruled over Syria and Egypt,
Yes.
and man, did he want Jerusalem back.
As he wins, and he wins small victories, but winning small victories increases his reputation. And that alone gives him more and more power as time goes on.
Annie the Digger Herman, you and I have traversed the Holy Land and visited many mighty fortresses. I think of Masada, I think of Herodium, but this one is unique.
Yes.
Where we are standing right now is not from the biblical period, which you and I usually focus on. What is this ancient fortification?
Yes, this is a rather neglected period, which I personally love, a medieval bloody chapter called the Crusaders.
And some, 800-900 years ago during the Crusades, this was a mighty fortress.
Yes.
Where we're standing right now. It was called?
Chastelet, un petit fort, okay? Of course, it's to fool the Muslims. During the time of the Crusaders, it was a very fantastic love-hate relationship between the French, most of them French Crusades, and the Muslims. When they were not butchering one another, they were doing trade with one another. In 1179, the Templars, which were bound to the king, decided to go on their own and establish here a chastelet, a little fort.
That's what it means in English, a little fort, just a little fort.
Yes, which in reality, of course, was totally the opposite. A giant fortress,
Yeah,
which will
huge.
enable them to tax any merchant convoy of the Muslims passing here. And the leader of the Muslims at the time is Saladin. He was furious. He appeals against this to the Crusader king Baldwin IV.
The leper king.
The leper king. He offers him 60,000 silver coins. Just stop the construction here. Like ransom. It's amazing how battles would sometimes end with ransom.
Bartering, yeah.
Okay, and Baldwin IV wasn't certain. He came here personally and he viewed what was happening. He reached the conclusion, let's keep working. Saladin said, okay, 100,000 coins, just stop this work, abandon this place. They kept working. And now Saladin is furious and he decides, I'm going to conquer this place. I'm going to throw them out of here. And indeed, the site is completed by April 1179. A month later, Saladin reaches this place. It circles it, and he tries to attack it, but one of his generals is hit by an arrow, and he decides to pull back. He goes and fights the Crusaders elsewhere, but he will return in August, and this time with a plan that succeeded.
And we're going to go up on top of this castle right now to hear more about that plan, which goes down in history as perhaps the beginning of the demise of the Crusader kingdom here in the Holy Land.
Totally. But before we go, look at these walls. Look at these massive walls uncovered on both sides. Conquering this place would be an obstacle. How do you overcome this as a Muslim leader?
Yeah.
What will be the secret tactics that will succeed? Let me show you.
Let's go.
So one thing that the Crusaders failed to evaluate is the fact that these massive walls are built on top of a fill in some cases. And what Saladin did is take a group of miners to dig a trench beneath the walls, fill it up with wood, and cause a big fire. Now the walls, their facade is big white limestone blocks, but they are filled inside with small field stones that are connected with lime. And lime in heat, in extreme heat, it kind of melts. And the bottom line is from the extreme heat beneath the wall, the whole thing collapsed, and that's how he could penetrate.
That's how he got it. And by the way, extreme heat from the fire that was set, extreme heat here, it was August.
It was also August.
In Israel, in the Galilee, it gets very, very hot. What miserable conditions they were battling under. They are able to breach the castle.
Yes.
They get inside and then carnage ensues.
And they start to slaughter the Crusader fighting forces here. What's amazing is that we have detailed accounts of this battle, both from Crusader sources and Muslim sources. So the documentation is quite reliable. And we found evidence. We found right here, we found a skeleton of a big mule or a small horse with an arrowhead in his skull, which is probably what killed it. We found over 1,500 arrowheads in general at this site. But the holy grail of this battle is still to be exposed. Both sources tell us that eventually the Crusaders that were slaughtered here were thrown into a big pit. And we are still looking for it. A pit full of skeletal remains of some 700 warriors.
The Crusaders here are wiped out inside this massive castle. The walls are breached. Saladin is victorious, but he's got some issues after the victory, right?
We are told that after the conquest, Saladin actually stayed here to make sure that the Crusaders wouldn't reclaim it. He also undermined the walls. He intended to knock down the whole building. As you can see, he only got rid of the walls. The foundations are still here. But he paid heavily for staying here in the summer because those bodies were not only causing a stench, they were causing a plague. He lost a lot of his men because of this plague, and this is why this became kind of a cursed place from a Muslim point of view, despite the great victory. And that's when he eventually left the place. To this day, there's a Muslim period memorial structure, like a kubba, which is perhaps commemorating the loss of his own people after they conquered the place.
Very interesting. He paid a price for this victory. His first really great victory over the Crusader forces, who repelled him previously, and really the first major dramatic loss for the Crusaders, it seems, which started a downward spiral, right?
Yes, with the biggest defeat about 8 years later, on the 4th of July, 1187, next to Tiberias, the Horns of Hattin.
Elliot, leading up to the Battle of Hattin, where are we right now geographically?
We are, first of all, standing on the slopes of an extinct volcano, overlooking the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias to our east, the Mediterranean out there. We can see the sun is setting to our west. Figure roughly 30 plus miles from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Galilee. We're most of the way to the Sea of Galilee here.
And in many ways, the decades of warfare and battle between the Crusaders and the Muslims here in the Holy Land during the Crusader period kind of culminates, in a sense, right here.
Yes.
How did it all come here to the Galilee, to Hattin?
First of all, the Crusader kingdom, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, has been deteriorating, corroding. There have been battles along the rim, along the fortresses, and as we mentioned, all in all, the kingdom is holding its own, but there's rot. Saladin crosses in late June, early July of 1187, crosses from the area of Damascus, Syria, into the Galilee. At this point, Raymond of Tiberias is no longer his friend.
They've been kind of bartering,
right,
some backdoor deals.
Right, but it's over.
Yeah.
And there's a new king, Guy de Lusignan, a new Crusader king, king of Jerusalem. He becomes king through marriage. There are those who oppose him, those who support him, Raymond among those who oppose him. The Crusaders decide they're going to defend the Galilee against Saladin's incursion. And at this point, Raymond joins up with Guy de Lusignan. In other words, he removes his opposition, he swears his loyalty to him, and he becomes one of the key players in this drama. Another, Reginald, who's sort of almost the inverse of Raymond, a troublemaker, a no-goodnik, who has violated every truce he possibly can with Saladin, launches a raid on Mecca, kills Saladin's brother. Let's just say that there's no love lost between him and Saladin. So on the morning of July 3rd, 1187, they set out on a march from Tipori to Tiberias. Now, the numbers in the battle don't tell the whole story, because the Crusader army numbers about 20,000, and the best guesstimate of Saladin's army is about 30,000. Now, 20,000, 30,000, it's workable. However, The Crusader army of 20,000 only has about 1,200 horsemen. Saladin's army has 12,000. I'll remind you, 1,200 horse on the Crusader side, 12,000 horse on the Muslim side. Guy knows that his rear guards, who have been fighting the Muslims all along the way, and his core force, by the way, core horsemen, are the monastic knights of the Hospitallers and the Templars.
Templars, of course.
Okay. He comes up here onto the Horns of Hattin because it's defensible. The mistake is that he doesn't need to defend, he needs to attack. He's got to get out of here. Now, Saladin has come up from there and encircled the mountain from the two sides. Once Guy pulls his forces up here, he closes the ring on him. Now you can't get out. To make things worse, because Saladin understands this, he has his men light up all the grass around here and cover this hill with heat and smoke through the night. They get up in the morning, and the first thing Saladin does is drop his ring back. He doesn't want to fight this battle first thing in the morning. He wants to wait for the sun to get to a good point to really pound down on their heads. Raymond, with about 300 of his horsemen, try to break through the ring. Now, there are springs down here, and he tries to break through. Saladin, realizing what's happening, orders his men to open their lines and allow Raymond and his 300 men to ride through, and then closes his lines behind them. Raymond doesn't break through, he's allowed to go through. And now he's on the wrong side
Of the circle.
of the circle. And he makes a very wise decision of discretion is the better part of valor. He says, bye guys, and he continues on to Tiberias.
I'm out of here.
That's right. I didn't want to be here in the first place. I told you not to come here. I didn't mean to flee, but now that I'm out, I'm not going back.
And so the circle breaks, Saladin closes ranks once again, and we have a desperately thirsty, literally dying of thirst group of thousands of crusaders.
Many of whom either die of dehydration or heat stroke, others who are killed simply because they can't move, and the rest are captured. And the aftermath of the capture is a story in and of itself, because Saladin has Guy and the other leaders, including Reginald and the other aristocrats, again, third stringers but aristocrats, brought to a pavilion that he sets up somewhere over here. He offers Guy a cup of water, and he tells him, kings don't kill kings. And Guy drinks, and they're all desperately thirsty. And he turns to offer the water to Reginald, who's standing next to him, and Saladin swats it out of his hand. He says, he will not drink from my cup. Because if he had, he wouldn't be able to do what he did next, which is kill him. The rest of them sit down, he serves them, and then puts on a display of killing some 300 of the monastic knights of the Hospitallers and Templars. But the key here is that that 20,000-man army was made up of reserves pulled from the garrisons of fortresses all around the country. So when that army went down, you had a totally weakened kingdom. Within a month, the Galilee falls to Saladin. In September, Jerusalem falls. Belvoir and Tzfat hold out another year and two, but by 1189, it's all over.
Final thoughts here, Elliot, at Hattin. The ultimate ramifications of this historic battle really hastened the demise of the Crusaders here in the Holy Land.
It ended the first kingdom of Jerusalem. The second kingdom of Jerusalem sat in Akko, which already tells you something. The Third Crusade, with all of its local success, is a much weakened effort compared to the First Crusade. Its ultimate defeat, and again, it goes through its period and ultimately deteriorates, means that this region falls out of European hands for centuries. It establishes a status quo that holds for at least 6 or 7 centuries. It changes the politics of Europe. In other words, there's an indirect impact.
Not an exaggeration to say this battle, the Battle of Hattin at the Horns of Hattin, changed the course of Middle Eastern and European history and history in general. Folks, what a fascinating tour we had tonight through pivotal events in the history of the Middle East, Europe, and Christianity, all taking place in the medieval period. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. The Bible tells us that Israel has always been and will always be a hotspot for spiritual battles, including some major prophetic battles to come like the Battle of Armageddon, which will be the ultimate climax in the battle of good versus evil. In the meantime, as believers, it's our job to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for Israel, but it's also our job to speak up for biblical and moral truth and have Israel's back when the forces of darkness surround them like we're seeing right now. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will fulfill his covenant promises to the people and the land of Israel. And as followers of Jesus, we have a front row seat to all that he's about to do. So be encouraged. Stakelbeck Tonight, my all-new nightly series on current events through a bold biblical lens. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.